Hello and what is up YouTube? My name is G3 Iron and today we are talking about some drama in PoE, some specific drama relating to skin transfer MTX. Now, those of you that aren't familiar with drama inside PoE, it happens just like in any other game. There are bugs that are found to be exploitable, and then different people will go about exploiting those bugs. And GGG, throughout the course of time and history, have had different approaches to dealing with people who have exploited bugs or with people who have attempted to exploit bugs, or with people who have reported bugs that have been exploited by other people. So first off, this happened last week. People figured out a way to buy skin transfers and then transfer those skins from various Blight uniques that had allocated passives on them, because with Blight uniques you can actually allocate passives on the tree. You can anoint them with oils. And people figured out a way to abuse the skin transfer system to actually re-imprint, as it were, the item, the original item that was meant to have the oil anointment from Blight, onto another item by skin transferring it. So there was a whole hubbubaloo last week, and that of course was really probably just righteous outrage across the board at how big of a bug this was, and with how big of a problem this would become. Of course, for those of you that have already heard about this, you're going, okay, yeah, this was some pretty big news, and you probably already have been outraged about it. For those of you that aren't familiar with what exactly was going on, this essentially means that the power level of anointments were now available to people who were willing to pay real-life cash money for skin transfers. It was available then to move any kind of anointment that you'd want onto any other kind of item that you would potentially want, as long as the skin transfers would allow you to do that particular item, to skin transfer from one item to the other, as long as they shared the same appropriate base type for the skin transfer. So it was a pretty big blunder, and there's of course a thread going on presently on the general discussion topic. This one is made by Glinter. He says, are you guys going to delete the bugged items? You can't be seriously thinking that autismos like me are going to let this thing go under the radar. This was a gigantic bug, and people sold items for thousands of exalts with bugged anointments. Some guy even has a legacy combs on standard with a bugged constitution on it. Hilarious. Here's some image proof for those who have not yet seen GGG's massive blunder, LOL. Now, here's the thing. There's a couple of school of thoughts going on involved in this particular discussion, and I'm going to flip over here and show you some trade screens as we chat about some of these schools of thought. First off, this is the standard trade screen. This is just searching by things that have allocated passives, and you can actually see right now it looks like everything's pretty much clean. These are all regular, regular. The vast majority of these actual amulets are far and above anything that my character will ever be able to purchase, or your character most likely will ever be able to purchase or use. Nonetheless, these are top tier amulets inside standard that all have allocated passives on them, most likely from purchasing oils that have been lost in hardcore and then brought over into standard, or the item itself was created in hardcore and then it's been brought over to standard with a dead character. So all of these look to be that they check out, right? These are amulets. Amulets are supposed to have allocations for passives. However, when you look at Softcore Blight League, you can see when you sort by things of their price listing, you can start to see, a Feral's Fur has got allocates Whispers of Doom. You can scroll down and see another Feral's Fur has got Whispers of Doom. You can see a Bubonic Trail, which are a pair of boots, has got Heart of Ice. Then you continue scrolling. I think there were two more here. Here's a Carcass Jack, allocates Whispers of Doom. That shouldn't be able to happen. Here's an Eternity Shroud that allocates Whispers of Doom. So you can start to see that there are various and sundry unique items that ought not to have it. Now here's a Spores Guard Saints Hauberk. This is actually the Blight unique chess piece that is supposed to be able to properly anoint a passive. So this one is good. This one's legit. But then when you look up at Hiri's Ire, this is one of the bugged items. When I say legit, I simply mean bugged. I don't mean that it was, in some way, duped or in some way purchased via RMT or something like that. I'm saying there's a difference here, and the distinction is between items that were originally designed and intended by GGG to be produced with anointments on them. And then there were items that were bugged that were not intended to have passives anointed on them, like Hiri's Ire or like Albron's Warpath. Or something like, here's another Hiri's Ire, several different Hiri's Ire, or Eternity Shroud. So you can start to see that there's a pretty widespread problem across the board. And of course, there's lots of people who are wanting an explanation for this. Those of you that are new to PoE, you might not know that there's actually a history of this sort of drama. There's a bug that gets found inside the community and somebody exploits it. And then depending on the severity of the bug, GGG reacts to it. So there is this post right here that says, are GGG likely to do anything about these bugged exploits? This is from 3 days ago on Reddit. And of course, this is simply an Eternity Shroud that allocates Whispers of Doom that was shared in a global chat. So this was an image captured by Desidoran. Well, Natalia actually did respond to this. And she said down here in the thread, hi, we fixed the bug yesterday and are preparing to delete the bugged items, but this process may take several days as we have to scan many billions of items. The natural question asked by Live Jamie, of course, is, are people going to get into trouble? Right? Because there's apparently people out there who are purchasing skin transfers and know how to do this and are therefore making in-game currency using their real game money. So is there any kind of conflict here? Because essentially, PoE, at least in this bugged situation, has become pay to purchase something in-game, which is something that GGG has absolutely been abhorrent of in the past. It's something that GGG doesn't want to promote. It's something that GGG doesn't sanction. It's against the terms of service to ever use, IRL money, actual cash or actual economic valued monetary systems to purchase things in-game. They don't do that. The only thing they do is sell microtransactions. You can't actually purchase in-game items on the worldwide server. Of course, the Chinese server is completely different. You can purchase items in-game in the Chinese server, but that's a different topic entirely. The rest of the world, you can't do that, and GGG has taken a firm stance that they will never allow that to happen. So this is clearly a bug. It's an unintended bug. And so asking the question, hey, are people going to get into trouble, is a pretty damn good question to ask, because there's lots of people out there who are doing this repeatedly and making in-game currency off of it. Now, for those of you, again, to go into the Wayback Machine, here's Atoha Nahui. Forgive me if I'm butchering your name. I always do that. He says, they deleted my rare flask. I really hope they will delete this as well. For those of you who don't know, here's a special treat. If you weren't playing PoE 2 years ago, this is a whole situation reminded me of a very familiar situation from 2 years ago, which was this rare flask. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is a rare flask that what it did is it gave you 51 maximum life, 44 maximum energy shield, 31 fire resistance, 25 cold resistance, 43 lightning resistance, and then crafted increased energy shield onto the actual flask. This was a rare flask that happened as a bug over 2 years ago. Okay, and for those of you wondering, well, why is this such a big deal, Iron? Who cares about this particular flask? Well, I'll tell you. This flask actually functioned as an additional item slot on the character that was giving these particular stats, regardless if the flask was being used or not. This was a completely unintended bug. This rare flask was essentially functioning as another item slot that was permanently on your character once you socketed the flask into your flask slot. So this was essentially giving extra stats at zero opportunity cost. I mean, I guess you lost a flask, spot, but whoop-de-doo if you can start making these suckers. Now, one of the big reasons why this was a massive problem 2 years ago, for those of you, again, who might be new to the game, you might not know this. Mirrors of Calandra can be used to copy rare items. They can be used to copy normal items. They can be used to copy magic items. They cannot be used to duplicate unique items. You cannot mirror a unique item. So while there's all of this various stuff going around with these uniques that are being bugged and having bugs, taken advantage of and having passives allocated onto uniques that ought not to have them, that's a unique, right? There's only one copy of it, supposedly, per each time somebody creates one of these bugged items. Nobody can go around and make mirrored copies of these particular uniques. Whereas with this rare flask, one of the things that GGG was worried about is that it's rare, and therefore people could have started mirroring this. So just imagine that. If you had enough currency from having this style of flask. You could essentially have 5 flasks equipped to you that were all rares and would have given you, well, just from these stats alone, would have given you enough resistances to not care about any other resistances on any of your gear, would have given you, what, 250 flat life, and then, what, just under 230 flat energy shield? I mean, this would have been ridiculous if this sort of thing was allowed to continue. And so Natalia commented this most recently, this past week, saying, hey, I hope they delete everything because, of course, as Chris said 2 years ago, they were going to get rid of this flask, and they did so. Chris said 2 years ago, well, that's certainly an interesting thread to wake up to. We will investigate and find the root cause of the base type change. In the meantime, this particular item may not stick around, so I would recommend not wasting mirrors on it. It ended up that this item did get deleted. It is one of the coolest, by far one of the coolest items in PoE history that this thing ever happened or was created via a bug. Now, that being said, it creates a precedence, right? The precedence is bugged item that wasn't intended gets deleted. So when we come back to the present case scenario, hey, we're in the midst of this scenario where people are going about creating a bunch of unique items. Now, you can't mirror them, but people have figured out the way to actually implement this. Now, I didn't want to make this video until after GGG had hotfixed and hot-patched that nobody could actually go back in and continue to make these. So, supposedly, as of 3 days ago, 2 days ago, they fixed the bug that allowed for the creation of these items. So there should be no more of these items that are getting created. However, the question still exists, what ought to be done with the players that were doing this, that were knowingly duping the system, as well as people who maybe have purchased these items, as well as the items themselves. Now, there's a couple of different ways to approach this, a couple of different ways to deal with this. One way to approach this would simply be to delete the item entirely. I think that's one approach that's possible, simply get rid of the entire item. However, that being said, if you delete the entire item, what you've done is you've punished the purchaser. So let's say I go in and I'm a new player and I have no idea what's going on in Blight, especially if I'm a standard player and I have no idea what's going on in a new league because I don't care to keep up with it. And I go and I purchase this Hiri's Ire Zodiac leather for 60 exalts. Well, when GGG tracks down this item and says, oh, this is a duplicated item via a bugged means that we never intended to exist in the game, we're going to delete this item. I, as a player, as a purchaser, would feel pretty upset that something that I spent 60 exalts on is all of a sudden no longer in the game. That would be a massive, massive bummer for the purchaser. For the seller, on the other hand, the seller just goes, hey, I don't have that deleted item anymore, and I made 60 exalts, so I turned a deleted item into 60 exalts. That sounds pretty good, doesn't it? That doesn't seem like a real fair and balanced way of approaching this. Another way that you could deal with this scenario is potentially go in and remove all of the allocated passives from these uniques that don't necessarily have it. I'm not sure what the technical difficulties are there on GGG's end. I have no idea what the technical difficulties would be in going in and hard coding and removing all of the passives from these particular items. That is another thing they could do, though. Another thing they could do is simply leave the item as is and say, you know what, these are going to be bugged uniques that simply exist inside our game. In which case, you're actually rewarding people for exploiting a bug that was present and you've now patched out. That being said, sometimes people ought to be rewarded for bug fixing. I mean, if you find a bug inside a game, a lot of the times what they used to do way back in my day when I had to walk uphill both ways to get to school and boot up my computer and go on to DLCell and you'd hear that bing, 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 and you'd see that phone connection dial into your computer. Back in my day, they actually used to pay people to beta test and to test games and that sort of thing. And they would give in-game rewards as well as monetary rewards to people who actually found problems and would improve the quality of life of the game. So you might say, well, people who bug tested this and figured this out ought to get to keep their currency and ought to get to keep the items, and maybe these items ought to stand as a moment in time or as a moment in history inside of PoE's lore. Maybe that would be something that would be a cool thing to do, to keep this as a commemorative part and piece of history inside PoE. That being said, it does give off a little bit of a slimy vibe, like, hey, if you figure out a way to use a pay-to-win system to benefit you, you should do it. That sends really the wrong message, and something that GGG has never been about. GGG has never been about a pay-to-win system. They simply haven't been. The only actual, legitimate authoritative claim that anybody can ever say about GGG being pay-to-win is that you purchase in-game stash tabs, and that therefore is pay-to-win. But that doesn't actually help your character at all. Yes, it does give you more room to store stuff, but it doesn't actually boost your character's like power or strength or anything like that. It just increases your storage. So that's really the only thing that you can argue that GGG's really, heavily behind the pay to win thing. Whereas if they say, hey, we're going to leave these items in the game, that essentially tells people and communicates, hey, you found a bug that was pay to win bug and you get to keep it as a result. So this is really a PR nightmare in a lot of ways, where it feels like there's a lot of different options that are out there for the direction in which GGG could go to actually addressing these sorts of items. But in some way, somebody's going to get punished, maybe righteously and maybe inadvertently. Maybe a purchaser who didn't know anything or know better. Maybe a seller who purchased from somebody else and now they don't want to use it anymore. Maybe somebody that simply found a bug and thought it was a cool bug, but didn't actually know it was a bug, just thought it was an unintended vendor recipe. That's my last point today, is simply to say that there are yet to be found or yet to be announced that they've found vendor recipes that exist inside PoE. The Sunday afternoon, at least Sunday U.S. time, that the Lore Weave recipe was discovered and was made public was a massive afternoon for us in a guild. I still remember Ferrum and Fat Rat and Starbucks and Beckett and a couple other guildies. I was pinging everybody. I was texting all sorts of people who were offline and saying, get online right now. We just figured out this amazing, awesome recipe, and we need to get trading for unique rings right now because these unique chests are god tier, and we need to start trading for them immediately. This was way back when Lord Weave was pre-nerf and before elemental resistances got nerfed on it and all sorts of things. It was an amazing item, and that first day paid for several of our builds for the entire league. It was a wonderful, amazing trading day. But that being said, that item vendor recipe was previously unknown. Nobody had figured it out. Somebody figured it out, and then away it went. It had this massive, awesome, lasting impact and story that continues on in the PoE community about various simply combinations of recipes that get found out. So yes, on the one hand, there are bugs like this that exist inside PoE that are exploitable and that should be shut down and patched. But then there are also recipes and vendor recipes and sometimes hidden Easter eggs that we as players aren't necessarily sure about. Now you might go, yeah, but Iron, that's kind of a weak argument. I mean, this is something that they patched out. They said it was a bug right away. Natalia said it was a bug and they patched it out. So, how can anybody say that this was a bug? Well, in the moment that you find out something cool and you're the first person to find something out in PoE like this, that's amazing. That's a really, really awesome feeling and a really, really cool way to express your ingenuity, your creativity, and simply your tinkering inside PoE, that you figured something out that no one else has. Now, obviously, lots of people figured out how to do the skin transfer thing. And ultimately, what GGG does is really in their corner. What they decide to do is going to be ultimately their decision. I personally am of the camp that either you got to delete the entire item and delete the currency that was made in the exchange for the item, therefore punishing the buyer and the seller, or you got to get rid of the passive. But again, if you get rid of the passive on the item, you're really punishing the buyer. You're not punishing the seller. And goodness knows, how are you actually going to go through and punish like individual exalteds that were traded or individual chaos that were traded? Like, I don't even know the technicalities of that and whether or not that's even possible. And then of course there's banning. People have talked about banning people that have made profits off of this, which are up in the air. I really do think that in a lot of ways would send the wrong message. We've had lots of people discover bugs and then report them to GGG in the past, and they haven't gotten banned, right? So I'm sure there were some people who were doing this to try to test it to see if it would work, and I'm sure there were some people sending in tickets as well saying, hey, look, this thing works. Can we get a bug fix out for this like ASAP, because this is going to be a massive, massive problem moving forward. Anyway, that is a short recap on the Blight passive skin MTX drama that has been going on, as well as a brief recap on some history, on some PoE history, which, oh man, that flask was amazing. It would have been really cool if that could have stuck around and everybody could have had flasks. That would have changed so much about the PoE meta. But anyway, enough reminiscing about nostalgia back in the day. Those are my thoughts. What are your thoughts on this entire skin MTX transfer situation? Do you have any particular feelings or leanings about a solution for either the items, the players, or simply bugs like this in general and how they ought to be dealt with, other than simply, hey, shut down the bug immediately? GGG knows that already, but what would your solution be? Go ahead and drop us a comment down below. And as always, thanks so much for watching, and I hope today is the day a Mirror of Calandra drops for you. Thanks for watching that video. If you'd like more information on any of our discussion points today, you can see them down below in the video description. If you'd also like to join our Discord or support our Patreon, you can do so with the links down below. Thanks again, and big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters.